I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm recording today and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands wherever you may be listening from and wherever my guests are joining from too. Sovereignty was never ceded. This was and always will be Aboriginal land. Hey everyone, and welcome to Jenuine Conversations. So today I'm joined by Jon Yeo. It becomes a bit of a tongue twister when you say that in one close sentence together. Jon is the founder of Bright Star and a leadership and communication coach who helps people speak with more impact, clarity and empathy. His work focuses on developing better leaders, people who are leading with confidence, emotional intelligence and strong values. He's also really passionate about mentoring and creating more human-centered systems within the workplace. So without further ado, let's get into it. Thanks so much again for meeting with me today, Jon.
Hey Jen, thanks for I'm doing it too now. Thanks for inviting me.
That's all good. Awesome. Well, to kick things off, I guess I just wanted to, for our viewers, maybe people who aren't, sort of familiar with your work and what you do, if you can give us a bit of an overview of, exactly what you do, how you sort of came into being, the founder of Bright Star and all the amazing work that you're doing.
Sure. Look, in summary, I help leaders become better communicators and influencers, but I originally did it not out of training, but because of necessity. So there's a few things sort of characteristic about myself. I'm a shy person. I also have a cultural overlay of not sort of speaking up to people who are more senior. And that sort of shaped a lot of my early views in terms of how I should communicate and how I should speak. And then as an IT person, not great communicators either, it came this cumulative effect. I began my IT career right at the beginnings of the Y2K scenario, which a lot of people would remember, getting computers to go from 1999 to 2000. I know a lot of people chuckle, but it actually was a thing, and it was very clear and present back there because the internet internet wasn't even really existing, and computers were very fragile. And so I ended up trying to convince people that Y2K was a thing. That was the first thing. And as a newly minted graduate, I couldn't really get a meeting with the CEO, but he had to walk past my office, my cubicle, to be honest, my cubicle on the way to his office. So I got really good at these short sound bites at a level I could understand that got his attention. And I sort of developed this capability where I ended up living in London, where I was working with traders' machines. And I had to take the machine for about, at least 45 minutes. The challenge being that for every 15 minutes that trader didn't have the machine, they were losing £1 million. So it was pretty high stakes in terms of getting people's attention, keeping the attention and getting them to see the scope, scale and significance of what we were doing. And so that sort of became the hotbed or the impetus for my necessity. And then the nerd in me when I joined TEDx Melbourne was I could see all the TED Talks and I could see when someone would pause, rewind or abandon a video. And I used the statistical modeling for influence, what they did and what they said, and built models around influence there. So that sort of combined with my sort of previous experience then ended up being more out of request than identifying an opportunity that I should be in communications, and I've been basically doing it ever since.
Yeah, that's incredible. I always love hearing a story from introvert to, someone where you do nothing but kind of talking for the most part. I always find those stories interesting.
Yeah,
awesome. Cool. So I guess what kind of things do you do specifically to help leaders, especially when it comes to sort of building up that, sort of trust, communications, establishing their values and, having that sort of be quite present to employees and even consumers of, whatever their product is?
Sure. Look, when it comes to leaders and leadership really is, I think there's a big difference between people knowing what you do and valuing what you do. And our ability to demonstrate our value, to have either a reputation or ability to communicate and influence the way that causes someone to do something, then becomes a hallmark of your ability to get things done. And it's not just telling people what they should know. Everyone knows you should eat well and do lots of exercise, but no one does it. So knowing and doing are different things. So with that in mind, understanding the psychology of influence and getting people to say the right thing at the right time to the right person in the right way then becomes a hallmark of great leadership and communication. And that's over and above just information transfer, which you could arguably do in an email.
Absolutely, for sure. And in terms of, I guess, the psychology kind of side of things, this was a question I wanted to get into later, but I find psychology incredibly interesting. What do you find sort of actually really kind of helps someone be more influential, I guess, on a sort of granular level, or sort of up their emotional intelligence? Because I think that's something, emotional intelligence is something that's spoken about a lot more nowadays. People might have a differing opinion
Sure.
of what that exactly sort of looks like. And in the workplace, I guess, particularly for leaders, even for, employees as well, like it's finding that sort of balance of, being professional, but we're all human, at the end of the day. So,
Sure.
yeah, I guess in terms of the psychology side of things, could you go into that?
Yeah, look, psychology really sits broadly from a communication point of view in two major areas, which is really your ability to be clear and articulate and your ability to build trust, rapport, and relationship. And it's the combination of those that creates your reputation or your ability to influence. So I'm always getting people to deconstruct their communication and think about it in that way. There's the message you have, there's the individual leader that's speaking, and then there's the audience. What is the needs and expectations of that audience? So to answer your question, knowing the needs and expectations of the audience, knowing the state or their ability to listen, or their desire to listen, then becomes just as important as what you say. I like to use the example, what do you do at work? It's a fairly simple question, but the audience will influence how you say it and what words you use. For instance, if that audience was the local kindergarten, probably little preparation and you just turn up. But if the chair of the board was coming in that afternoon and you had to tell them what you do at work, the words you use would be different. The way you say it would be different. So it's about being adaptable in your communication with the individuals you're engaging with, as opposed to what do you know or what your expertise is, because arguably they're par for the course. If you haven't got those, you shouldn't be in the room.
Definitely, for sure. And is there any advice, I guess, that you would sort of have for someone, even, if I use myself as an example, I could relate to what you said earlier about not always sort of having that confidence to speak up. And I think it's something that sort of does come with age. So whether it's someone that's early on in their career or, sort of later on, what do you sort of do? I guess, like, what kind of mentoring or advice do you sort of give, for people to be able to kind of speak up in the workplace?
Yeah. Look, at an individual level, there's always planning, preparation, and practice that's required. If you're thinking, what do I need to say? Or how do I need to say it? Or are they understanding what I'm talking about? Then you're in your head. And if you're in your head, it's very hard to connect with someone else because you're distracted. The second part of that is clarity. If it's clear in your head, it can be clear in their head. If it's not clear in your head, they haven't got a chance. So that's the second part. And then the third part is, well, what is the reputation or your ability to build trust and rapport quickly, or even before you even meet, even better, that enables them to be open to listening to what you want to say. And so, in effect, that boils down to, well, what are you going to say in terms of content? What's the situation in hand in terms of context? For instance, an emergency meeting, people will pay more attention than to a regular weekly meeting. And then what's the intent, which is what do they believe you bring to the table in terms of value, and what's the caliber of relationship you have with them in order to agree to sit down and listen in the first place. And it's about understanding, content, context, and intent then become the three levers that you need to be able to handle in order to get a message across the line. And so it's a dynamic rather than a formula. And a lot of people give formulas, and I think it's the dynamic between the three that makes influence really important.
Yeah, that's especially interesting coming, from you from like an IT background and things like that, sort of breaking down dynamic versus formula. That's super interesting.
Yeah.
Do you think, I guess this is like more of a broader question, but for leaders that you've sort of worked with, do you find any sort of commonalities between leaders that do describe themselves as more introverted compared to ones that are more sort of extroverted and have found themselves in this, position where, they are looking for your help, they're looking for that sort of guidance? Which ones, I guess, sort of you work best in your opinion? Very general question, but it's a bit of a cheeky one I wanted to ask.
No, it comes up quite a lot, actually. A lot of people kind of assume that extroverts are better communicators or find it easier to communicate. And while I think that's a fair assumption. I think where introverts really have the advantages is they have a keen observation skill. They have a keen insight skill that extroverts don't have. They have a presence and a quietness about them that some people need in times of emergency or panic or extreme pressure. So I think rather than saying one is good and one is bad, I think they have different advantages in different situations.
Sorry, you just cut out a little bit there, John.
Okay. Look,
No, you're
the
back
recording
now.
should capture it. Yeah. The recording
It should?
capture it.
Okay,
So,
perfect.
yeah.
We'll edit that little bit out. So
Yeah,
I'll get you to
well,
keep
it
going.
should
Sorry
do
for
it
that.
you. Yeah, from its side, it records locally and then it uploads it centrally, so nothing ever gets lost. But for your
Okay.
benefit, because you didn't hear what I said, which is I don't think there's an inherent advantage and disadvantage being extrovert, introvert. There's just situational context where being an extrovert is helpful and being an introvert is helpful. So, that quiet resolution, that insight, that ability to make keen observation is the domain of the introvert. The ability to build trust, build rapport, connect and open up people is the domain of the extrovert. But if an extrovert is in a room, invariably what often happens is it shuts down the introvert. And so that's where we need to be somewhat flexible in our nature in terms of, as an introvert, knowing when to maybe keep quiet, and as an introvert, knowing when to stand up, are really self-awareness capabilities that define a really good leader, even if you're naturally an extrovert or an introvert. And it's about managing your energy, your state, and the space you create for open conversation, that safe space, that then really becomes the hallmark of real influence.
Absolutely. And speaking of safe spaces, I wanted to touch on something we've sort of personally spoken about, just kind of touching on, I guess, sort of diversity and inclusion within the workspace. For, I guess, the leaders that you're sort of meeting with when you're giving advice specifically sort of around this, what are some ways, leaders can, really make sure that they're sort of bringing in that sort of mixture of diversity, inclusivity, without it necessarily feeling sort of tokenized or like they're sort of ticking boxes? Like there is, certainly numbers and things like that need to be adhered to, is something I've kind of learned about how HR works and things like that. But yeah, like, sure. I guess it's a very delicate sort of subject, and it's something that needs to be handled with care. So what sort of advice do you have, in those sort of situations?
I think awareness is, and the mere fact that you're thinking about it is you're already well ahead of the people who aren't. And so awareness is a first part. The second one is be curious, understand what the diversities are, understand what attributes and qualities bring to the table, and then understand when's the best time to tap into those, so that not only is there full representation, but there's the diversity and strength of the group fully actualized. Now, any smart leader will take their smartest person with the right talent and apply them at the right time. And so diversity of thought or background or culture or any of those other characteristics then becomes technical advantages rather than disadvantages. And there's an awful lot of data to say. Even something as basic as more women on boards automatically increases the revenue and profitability of an organization. I mean, if those numbers don't change people's minds, it's very difficult to convince anyone in anything else. So I think the awareness is the first part. There is a commitment. It's a little bit like a mental muscle. It's weak to start with, and you're going to kind of build up. But once you do build it up, it becomes a natural capability. And then I think the other part is being open, asking more, being genuinely interested. I have got a whole bookshelf of various subjects that allow me to have a breadth of insight and learning that, I guess, not only give me an understanding, but a perspective of how valuable that diversity is. And, it works in culture, it works in people, it works in knowledge. And so, no one would want to go to a bookstore and only have everything on one topic. No one would want to go to a library and have, that's like, why would you do that? And I don't think diversity in the workplace should be any different.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, it's interesting understanding some of the metrics behind it. Like whenever it's a topic that comes up, I'm very much a feelings, emotionally sort of led, kind of person, and just coming from my own sort of experience as well, as a person of color. Like it's really interesting to understand. No, there are metrics behind it. It's not like a box ticking sort of exercise, and things like that. And I'm a big believer in that people with different lived experiences, no matter what that sort of looks like, definitely brings more, not less, to a workplace for sure. And I like that comment as well about it being a muscle that sort of needs to be built up. I think unfortunately, depending on where you are in the world or what your experiences are, sometimes you do sort of come at things with this kind of smaller, kind of point of view. And, that's something that can evolve with time. So that's, really great to hear.
Yeah, it's funny because you think about everyone reveres a peacock, but no one reveres a peahen, and it's because the peacock's the one with all the colours. It's the colours that make that interesting, right? We see things so obvious in front of us, but yet we forget to, actualise that in the workforce, and I think that's a huge lost opportunity.
Absolutely, for sure. And what would you say, like, for businesses where, like, and another sort of cheeky question, but I like asking those, and you don't need to mention any sort of particular names, but either in your experience or just, sort of observing, as someone who works with businesses in this sort of scope, what do you think sort of happens when a business isn't, following their values, or they're sort of presenting a certain sort of set of values, but they're not, the proof isn't in the pudding, essentially? And what kind of, I guess, work do they need to do to kind of improve on that?
That's a really complicated question. The reality is, if an organization is not known for being future focused, innovative, progressive, thought leading, it's just going to fall behind. And I don't think diversity is an essential agreement for all those things to thrive, for a start. I think the second part is that you're just not going to attract the best talent, because you're automatically narrowing down what's possible or not. But probably even inverse to that, there's a whole bunch of bias that most people aren't aware of. That's why it's called a bias. That I think people really need to, I was going to say, question themselves on. It's not necessarily that, but it's certainly, what do we know or not know? What is the nature of bias? How do we create systems so they naturally are not impacting the outcome? And then what policy or progress do you have that supports that? And that final steps, I admittedly, is a big ask, but certainly in anyone's own corner, they can start to make a difference, whether it's speaking up more, or emphasizing more, or asking more questions, or being more inclusive, and making a genuine commitment that that diversity is going to make a difference, and then quantifiably measuring that. Like, you can say that will help or that won't help, but do they have the data? Yeah, and this is one of the things that I was talking about in terms of pause, rewind, and abandon. No one's ever really looked at the data. And so if I can prove that 30% chance of doing that, why wouldn't you do that? Or 50%, or whatever the percentage happens to be. A lot of people just make comments without the data. And I think it's not naive, but it's certainly presumptive.
Yeah, definitely short-sighted as well. Like, it's, I think without getting into any sort of specific topics, I think sometimes, people go, oh, we've got the data to back it. It's like, where did you get that data from? But when the data is there and people haven't taken that sort of step to look into it a little bit further, then where is that sort of, decision sort of coming from? And that's, coming from someone that is very sort of emotionally led. But I think it's good to sort of have the two sort of in practice. We are humans at the end of the day, and particularly with the way that the industry is moving, AI, all that kind of stuff, trendy topic always gets brought up. Sorry if anyone's sick of hearing it. But I think, having that kind of human sort of, centered approach to everything that we're doing is, the point of difference, and is the thing that's going to contribute to really good working, workplaces and relationships within the workplace, and great work coming as a result of it.
Yeah, exactly. And look, regardless of the diversity, what's the value being generated? If there's value being generated, then it shouldn't matter where it's coming from.
Absolutely, for sure.
I think people need to understand that.
Definitely. Yeah. And it might be my final question. I might go back on that. But I guess my potentially final question for you is when you kind of think about your younger self early on in your career, being that more sort of introverted IT person, my best friend's an IT person. So as soon as you were describing yourself back then, I had a picture in my mind. Did you
Yeah.
see yourself being where you are now, or was that an aspiration? Or I guess everything sort of ended up sort of transitioning organically. But if you put
Yeah.
yourself back to that sort of time and you go, cool, Jon at present day now, did you ever sort of see this coming for yourself?
No, absolutely not. In fact, it was the aggressive, I'm going to say aggressive, pushing by multiple people that in multiple places and organizations to say, you need to be doing this, that I decided to do it. And ironically, the bit got me over the line was the data. They said, you should be sharing this. And I've got a sample of this rate. Until I have a sample of this rate, I'm not going to move forward. It took me 2 or 3 years to get the data. But once I got the data and it still worked, I went, okay, there's a case. So that's when I stepped into it. So for me, everything is done very deliberately. We've got to be purposeful in what we do, otherwise we're random. And the problem with random, although it can take you to interesting places, is it takes you also on a lot of, side roads that really arguably we don't have a lot of time for.
Exactly. Yeah, no, I love that. That's very, it seems, like that IT background definitely, it comes through in what you're doing now. And I think that sort of mix is, incredibly interesting.
Yeah, there was a quote I saw from Shane Parrish literally yesterday saying, focus requires subtraction. And, it's just, if you're really going to hit your goals, you only do things that amount to building towards those goals, and everything else just has to go. And,
absolutely.
forget that. And so it's about being very deliberate about how you move forward and what you commit to. Otherwise, like I said, you can do lots of interesting things, but they're just going to burn time and energy that ultimately slow everything down.
Absolutely, for sure. And I think for a lot of people that, would be listening, I know for myself, I'm very much a creative at heart, and particularly for creatives, that sort of balance can be really sort of tricky because we're not always math focused. I know I'm terrified of numbers myself. So it's just sort of figuring out that balance without necessarily doing the equations, because I know for myself personally, I'm not the greatest at that. But that makes sense. And it's just that sort of balancing sort of act and breaking things down, making it a bit more granular. So that can be the same for business owners as well, or founders and things like that too. Yeah, not doing too many things at once because the math just won't add up.
Well, even creatives, I think they would understand grace and harmony. And, grace and harmony is where there's ease. Where there's ease, things come together. When things come together, that's the ultimate goal of a creative, right? When everything just flows. And so what do you need to cut out that cuts the flow? So it's not mathematical at that point. It's like catching a wave, I guess. You don't paddle before the wave gets there. You don't paddle after it's gone. You watch it come in, you align with it, and you ride that all the way into shore.
Yeah, absolutely. So that brings me to my absolutely last question, I promise. Are you a surfer yourself? I like the wave analogy. My partner's a surfer. That's why I ask.
Look, no, actually, I am not, because I don't really like cold, the cold very much. My parents are from the tropics, very much. Look, maybe if I lived in Hawaii, I might be into surfing, but certainly not in Melbourne.
No, I'm very much the same. My joke is that I'm meant for the desert with my Arabic background, but somehow managed to live in Melbourne and deal with the cold here. So I completely understand that. Could never catch me swimming in winter.
No.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. This has been a really great chat. Thanks again.
No worries. Anytime.